I'm about to say something negative, so I'm going to let it be the chaser to something positive. I love FF14. It's one of my favourite games, and I've invested tens of thousands of hours over the past decade and a bit, and I don't regret any of it. That's my shield against the pitchforks. Now, for the chaser. The leveling experience is, in many ways, kind of arse, and today I want to talk about it. It isn't all doom and gloom. It does a lot right, and I'll cover that too, but I'll be discussing what I believe to be some of the main issues and how a handful of solutions, both short and long term, could alleviate that feeling of malaise I get when I queue into low-level dungeons, or see the same complaints crop up from new players time and time again. With the hype cycle for the next expansion beginning to get going in the near future, I feel now is the perfect time to talk about these facets of the game I'd love to see get a bit of tender loving care. Before I jump in, if you want to support deep dives and discussions about FF14, please do consider subscribing. So, the first and most obvious issue with FF14's leveling experience comes in the way that jobs are designed in this game. I'm not going to critique dawntrail jobs at endgame. Regardless of your personal opinion on them, it's fair to agree that they are all functional at level 100, make sense, and look extremely cool in doing so. They are feature complete. It's taken them a long time to get there. Years and years of iterations and changes and new skills as expansion after expansion releases. Some of those alterations were minor, others were tantamount to a complete rework. Yet it feels like little thought has been given to how those jobs perform now in their incomplete states. Thanks to this long-term growth, we have reached a point where jobs just often do not make sense at low levels anymore, rotationally, in terms of satisfaction, or as a tool to induct newcomers. They're just in a weird place. Like how Dragoon, for some baffling reason, doesn't unlock a single AoE attack until level 40. Or how, for that matter, it doesn't even receive a third hit to its basic combo until level 26. How many dungeons into A Realm Reborn is that? 5? Before you get a third hit to your basic combo? AoEing in dungeons is one of the core tenets of fighting trash packs, and you'd think you want to instill that knowledge early, right? Dragoon is nowhere near the worst of it either, to make things clear. It just happened to be the jobstone I had equipped as I wrote this script. Black Mage might be a better one. That job is just wild at lower levels. Fire 4 is the core of its rotation, right? You don't even gain access to it until the end of Heaven's Ward at level 60. Even at that point, the job is an entirely different experience to what you'll be getting at endgame. There aren't any Umbral Hearts until level 58, and you'll be spending your time spamming Fire 1 in between Fire 3 procs, rather than managing your resources in the same way you would later on. Your priorities are all different. The job is something completely alien to itself at different level ranges. If we look at more recent additions, Viper and Reaper for example, just look at their low-level kits. Basic, empty, and devoid of everything that makes those jobs fun to play. These aren't isolated examples. Practically every job in the game is just bizarre at some point of their leveling experience, and most don't feel like they get off the ground until level 70 at minimum. Once you hit endgame, you realize what you're missing and it feels bad. And if you're new, you get the immediate impression that FF14 is a slow game without any combat depth, a false premise of how a number of jobs operate, and a bad initial tutorialization on how you want to be playing them. As an example of the third of those, let's look over to Warrior. At level 50, you unlock Storm's Eye, one of your combo finishers that allows you to gain a maintainable damage buff. It's an important part of your base rotation, and you want to quickly commit it to muscle memory. Firstly, why do you unlock that so late? But more importantly, why on earth do you unlock its AoE variant at a completely different point in your progression? So for like 8 levels, you're sat there putting up Eye via AoE even on single target. It's so utterly strange that this is a thing. Monk has a similar baffling decision by the development team. So, at level 50 you unlock Perfect Balance. That's your job quest capstone skill, and later in the game it'll lead into your burst window, allowing you to execute powerful blitzes. It's a core part of your rotation. Very good, very important. Except when you unlock it, it's almost useless because you can't form shift yet. You aren't gaining damage from using it, except in very specific niche situations. So you either get into the habit of using it anyway to prepare for later and lose damage, or you ignore it for now and learn how to play the job wrong. It's interesting because this is in part due to the constant updates jobs have gotten to bring them forward into present day. Every expansion, actions are pruned and others are added to roughly maintain overall hotbar sizes, whilst adding an extra 10 levels of growth to keep that fulfilling leveling curve. This is necessary, otherwise we'd have 50 plus buttons to fit on our hotbars now. But whilst it is necessary, it has the side effect of making these lower level ranges feel barer and barer, and we aren't getting anything to replace what's gone. A bunch of OGCDs, thoughtless damage, but they speed up the pace of the rotations nonetheless. Situational tools that you only use sometimes, but when you did, they'd feed into the engagement you felt. Even complete job mechanics have been cut away from the first 60 or so levels of their progression curves, and nothing has been added. This leaves early game quickly entering the realm of samey and arguably boring rotationally. I think even if you're on the side of jobs being in a fine state right now, you'd likely agree that some jobs having 5 or less buttons for the first 30 hours of gameplay isn't exactly the best onboarding experience for somebody to get. So I suppose in summary of that, jobs play weird at lower level ranges. Often it's bad for new players and frustrating for old. But that isn't where the strangeness ends. For example, many job actions are unlocked via job quests. At times, these can act as decent tutorializations on how to use the new ability you're picking up, as well as a fun or depressing little storyline to follow along with as you progress. But they are quickly entering an uncomfortable spot, because only some job quests at some points provide new actions. You are quickly creating this situation where players feel that they are not important to keep up to date with regularly. And then those same players completely miss out on core parts of their kit and end up being deadweight in your leveling roulette dungeon just because they don't know. I'm not necessarily arguing that we should expunge new skills coming from job quests. That would probably be a bit of a loss that I wouldn't want, but there has to be a better way of presenting that information to the player. Maybe those actions in the job action menu could display exactly which quest they are attained from. Or, when you hit that level range that unlocks it, you are pushed via pop-up and guidance and reminder to make that your next priority with it instilled on you, that this matters. Make it clear. I think the answer to the job conundrum is one that Square Enix have already touched on in the game to some extent. Low-level jobs should somewhat reflect their endgame version, just simpler. A kit should grow and make sense, step by step, expansion by expansion, and through playing it you should naturally be tutorialized in how to handle it later. Then, when you're doing story and dungeons, you're building muscle memory and knowledge. This is quite simple to achieve at its core. Reshuffle which actions you get and when alongside the release of the next expansion. So, a new expansion releases, you get actions or traits every 2 levels as normal, and the likely pruning of a couple of abilities occurs as usual as well. Developers still get carte blanche to do whatever they like in service of the job fitting their vision for it. But then, they go back and they reshuffle when you unlock older skills to skew them a little bit earlier in the process. Make sure you get the essential base fully unlocked by level 50. Provide an early AoE option. Make the progression feel really like progression, rather than zigzagging. I also feel like the baseline core of a rotation should be close to feature complete at level 50, even with any downsides that brings as a result. I think a good example with poor execution here is Monk, actually. By level 50 you have all of your basic combo actions, including each of its various finishers and midpoints, and that basic rotation interacts with itself in the exact same way it will at endgame. You are learning how and when to swap over certain combo actions versus others in the exact same way you will later. You unlock Perfect Balance, the ability that allows you to temporarily break those rules and will form the core of your burst window. The only thing it's really missing that I consider essential is having the finisher for those perfect balance charges that acts as the payoff for doing it all correctly. You get that at level 60 right now, so I'd love to see that shuffled forward a bit to account for how it bricks the rotation in its current format. Then, as you continue leveling, you get OGCDs, utility skills, the ability to form shift, disengage, upgrades, and you build out your burst window around that core base that you already have. It all makes sense and it flows quite nicely. And then whatever surprises they have for the punching prodigy will unlock and it'll reach a peak at 8.0. That's kind of what I want for every job, I suppose. It lends to making lower level content a bit more engaging as you have access to more of your kit. It avoids Square Enix actually having to face the conundrum of allowing full kits at lower level ranges as well, and somehow having to balance that. And it also helps early game for new players, and means that it gives them more of a rounded taste of what makes the combat so fun later on. Speaking of which, are we really sure we can't just have that? The challenge of older pieces of content has not been accurately maintained anyway. Surely it could be on the cards for us to bring back our kit and have their potencies normalized based on the level of the instance we are inside. Surely, whilst it requires more upfront legwork, it's a nice solution for those that have hit endgame already. Just me? Okay, sorry, I'll move on. Now, the Hall of the Novice has seen strides over time, and I do want to take a moment to properly appreciate that. Square Enix has heard the criticism in that regard, and added additional exercises that I think are good. Good job, lads. But once again, job tutorialization is lacking, and when you get to endgame, it quickly becomes apparent just how many players don't even have a basic understanding of how their job works. I'm not talking 99th percentile pass monkey optimization, I mean at the level of being able to press their 1, 2, 3s in a sometimes correct order a decent amount of the time. Whilst jobs experience minor changes regularly, the overarching structure barely shifts, and I'd like to see the Hall of the Novice feature individual job halls for exactly that. A series of short lessons culminating in a test. Gacha games do this at a very basic level. They showcase how a character's kit works, and then they let you play around with it. I think a rudimentary 14 version of this could do a lot to provide some of that baseline knowledge. Just, for example, Dragoon has 2 combos. These are the 2 combos. One puts up your buff, so you want to use that first. The other does more damage, so you alternate them. Now practice this. Make them simple and replayable and cover the basics. Honestly, I'd really appreciate this. Next comes a discussion that I believe will be far more controversial. But hey, I do believe it's worth having anyway. Now, Square Enix have put a lot of effort over the past 5 or so years to make its story content mostly soloable. You're now able to begin FF14 and reach the endgame whilst only playing with other people a handful of times throughout the entire process. That involved quote-unquote upgrading, and I use that term loosely, many of the Realm Reborn and Heavensward dungeons to ensure that NPC allies could easily complete them. Honestly, I don't mind most of the changes they made to enable this, I'm just hesitant to call it an outright upgrade. They stated in the past that this was one of their primary goals for quite a while, and I totally understand it. But now, what about archetypal MMO players? I would really like to see some structural game changes taking place to cater to those types of players as well. Because as much as some may not agree with me, they are equally as important to the overall health of the game as those who only care about the story. But a good amount bounce off, and it's easy to see why. FF14 has literally hundreds of hours of story, and almost all of it is essential. And whilst it's great content, and trust me, I'm not arguing that it isn't worth your time, that is not all there is to the game. There's raiding, and glamour, and trade skills, and most importantly of all, fishing. There are roleplay venues, and clubs, and gear chasing, and achievement hunting, and more. This is a virtual world, not a storybook. You can't boil it down to having just one thing, and that thing being all that matters, and it would be disingenuous to claim that the story trumps everything else in importance for every type of person. But if you aren't one of those story-loving gamers, you have your work cut out for you if you want to enjoy it and make it to endgame. A slog of dozens upon dozens of hours of cutscene skipping and busy work, occasionally interspersed by an instance dungeon and the once-in-a-blue-moon trial to break up the tedium. It's all too easy to fall off. They can't participate in endgame or raid with you. They can't access most of the content. They can't do current alliance raids. They are trapped until they leap over the sequence of hurdles Square Enix has laid out before them. This is the exact reason why I struggle to recommend FF14 to friends sometimes. My favourite game, and the one I've invested by far the most hours into, yet I can only recommend it to very specific people. That's weird, right? Those that should like it too, enjoyers of difficult raids and MMO-style gameplay, but they drop like flies. Surely there's a better way to handle this. One route to alleviate this that I'd love to see is having more of the game be shifted into side content, especially from older expansions. I'm not asking for people to just completely be able to skip the leveling process or anything like that, or for the entire story to just immediately become optional. Instead, I'd like if non-essential quests were moved into being side quests, maybe with a new icon, to denote that they tie directly into the main plot and thus are recommended. This would involve carving down anything that could even possibly fall into filler into those categories, and allowing them to be optional to tackle. This means that ideally, upon the catch-up, each expansion would be far faster to work through if you just want to progress rather than spend your time in it, and you will be pointed to side quests that tie into the MSQ regularly so that you can pick them up if you wish. Honestly, expansions post-launch could be half their current length following this model without harming too much essential content. This doesn't change a single thing for story enjoyers, but it allows those with other interests to join the fold. On that note, why on earth do side quests not give good experience points? What's going on with that? They should. If the main scenario is being cut down a little, alternate avenues to accrue experience points should be retuned, and they should be made not only viable, but attractive. Give people variety, let them interact with more of the game. If they want to level through side quests, make it decent to do so. Don't penalise them with a pathetic amount of experience. If they want to use deep dungeons, or fates, or dungeon spam, or anything else, or killing random mobs in the overworld, that's valid, and it should make them feel rewarded for their time, especially in older content at older level ranges. Let people go in, surge through the story, and expedite their leveling process on both their main jobs and alt jobs by allowing them to level up at a decent pace via any method they like. If we are rethinking everything, we should definitely be including how people are able to progress on their leveling journey. Surely a game with more ways to progress for those that enjoy different paces can only be a good thing. Let them level how they want, teach them how to play at basic levels, and make those jobs feel both fulfilling and make logical sense at lower steps of the process. That's all I ask. I'm trying very hard to make any changes I mentioned things that are realistic to achieve within the current framework of FF14 without months and months of dev time. But with that limitation removed, really, the world is your oyster. Please do let me know in the comments section what you think, ideally in a respectful manner, and if you have anything you'd like to see changed about FF14's leveling experience, I'd very much enjoy reading your ideas as well. Until then, it's just a few weeks until the first FanFest, so maybe we'll hear more about 8.0 and whether there will be any retroactive changes then. Thank you so much for watching this video if you made it all the way to the end. Please do consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member like these fine folks, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.